Hey guys, it's Jonathan McCormack. I'm an attachment specialist in New York, and this is the third part of a series on love. This comes from Sue Johnson's Love Sense. She's great. She's an attachment specialist, and this is going to be on emotions. Emotions kind of get a bad rep in psychology today, yet that's the very thing that's going to help you attune with your partner. People often ask me, I just said X, Y, and Z, and she or he flipped out. They overreacted. Or, can I make this request? Or is this too much? Is this not normal? And of course, the truth is that regardless, whatever you need to be comfortable is what you need. And it's not going to work out unless you get it. People think they can push these things aside, that things will get better, that they'll just ignore it, and your emotions will get worse. The anxiety will get worse, and the relationship will get worse. But in this video, I'll explain why. Sue Johnson goes into that emotion is the great communicator. It's in our bodies. A lot of times what I do is I do somatic stuff with clients. Where's that emotion in your body? We're so disembodied. And the fact is, we're always signaling to other people our emotions, whether we know it or not. Our emotions spur our own behavior. Your emotions, even if you're not realizing it, will convey your deepest needs, your hurts, and how you know from other people will be their emotions. And you've probably heard statistics where the vast majority of communication is non-verbal. And men who are a bit on the spectrum love this because they can sit there and say, oh, well, she told me that it was okay for me to go with my fishing buddies. And I'll say, yes, but she was screaming it at the top of her lungs. And that is a subtle, nonverbal cue that she was not, in fact, okay with it. And you need to attune and kind of pick up on these things. The truth is, our partners are central to our sense of safety. Friendships are great, but they don't go this deep. Your partner is going to be your main rock. And how can they shelter you? How can they be your safe harbor if they don't know what you're afraid of? If they don't know what you yearn for? What is your hunger in this relationship? And people are often afraid, their partner's going away, and they know their partner wouldn't cheat, but geez, those thoughts are in their mind. Can you convey those in a safe way? You have to learn how to, right? Those are skills you just have to learn, like, honey, I know this isn't your intention, and I know you would never do it, and this is me, this is my problem, this is my head. But I tell you, these thoughts going in my head, even though I know they're ridiculous, I can't get them out of my head that you would cheat him. I know you wouldn't. But these thoughts, and I just want to hear it from you, that everything will be okay and you would never do that, even though I know you wouldn't, just to calm me down. Can you do that and know it's safe? Or is the other person so sensitive, they'll flip out, they won't accept it? How dare you say that? How dare you not trust me? If your partner can't hear what your fears are, they cannot shelter you. You will not feel safe with them. And of course, if relationships are kind of a dance, emotions are the music. They tell you where to put your feet, They tell your partner where to put their feet. Mostly you broadcast emotion not with what you say, but through your facial expression, through your tone of voice. Those are complex signals happening. Women are much better at picking up these cues than men. Believe it or not, most social scientists say there are only six innate emotions. These are universal: fear, anger, happiness or joy, sadness, surprise, shame. Love was not in there, notice, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But fear, anger, happiness, sadness, surprise, and shame. Everyone is born with a capacity for those. Those will happen naturally. Why do you have emotions? Well, your mind gives you an emotion to make an act, to physically do something. If you're angry, perhaps you put up a boundary, perhaps you deal with a challenge or a frustration. If it's surprise, then your body's like, uh-oh, you better pay attention. You better explore. Fear, you better freeze or flee, And believe it or not, and this is absolutely true, people sometimes don't understand the power of this. Psychologist Matthew Lieberman proved this, that simply naming an emotion calms the emotion. It calms the brain down. So oftentimes I do ideal parent figure protocol, I do IFS, parts work, and I'll just ask, what are you feeling? And some people have a horrible time trying to figure out what they're feeling. And then when they do, it's very vague and abstract. I feel good, I feel bad, these big kind of emotions, but then you get more and more specific. As you get more specific, you will be naturally more calm, and you will have greater control over your emotional reactions. Daniel Siegel, the great attachment specialist, he is like the wheel of emotion. A big part of his therapy is like just literally naming emotions, figuring out the emotions and naming them. It does a lot. So naming an emotion is the first step to begin the process of regulating it and reflecting on it. You cannot reflect on your emotion unless you can name it. What am I feeling now? Why? Why am I feeling this now? And so not. And if you can do this, your relationships will be so much better, because say your partner says X, Y, and Z, and when they say that, you are automatically up in your head. You're up in your head. Well, if you're up in your head, you can't pay attention to them. You can't see their expression, how they're saying things. You can't even know what you're feeling. You're probably responding to a threat. Oh my God, what's happening? He or she said this. What does this mean? Try to figure it out. You're not attuned. You're not attuned. And people say, like, my husband would do X and I would flip out. As you start to name your emotions, husband would say X, but they weren't in their head. They're in their body, in their life, and they look and they see husband is sad. They would have never noticed that. Something's making him sad, or vice versa. Something's making my wife sad, whereas before, I never paid attention. I just heard those words and just figured it's a complaint or a threat. But no, now when I attune into it, I can see, So instead of freaking out, instead of getting confused, you recognize, And it's kind of like pinning everything down, seeing the cues they're sending, seeing your inner responses to make sense of them, and everything can be more clear and therefore more manageable. So a lot of times someone will say something and the person will clamp up. But if they really see what's behind it, they can say something. When you get so sad, I don't know what to do. And that scares me. Where you're getting depressed again. And I realize I start getting upset. The old saying, it's cliche, but it's true. What we can name, we can tame. When we can give meaning to something, you can tolerate it. You can tolerate it. A lot of times our emotions will feel intolerable. And if you can tolerate it, then maybe you can change it. That's the thing, tolerating it. Oftentimes I'll have a client, I'll ask how some negative thing felt, and I'll say, just stop. Ask yourself, can you allow this feeling? Can you allow this uncomfortable sensation, this pit of your stomach, you're sweating? Can you just be with it? Be with it. kind of step back, and just unblend, and can you just be with it? And the more you practice tolerating it, the more you can calmly assess it. Now, as far as love goes, it's a bit of a controversy. Not everyone agrees. But love, most would say, I would say, love is not an emotion. I say that for a lot of reasons. First of all, if you look at the history of the world, and both in their religious thought and their philosophical thought, most cultures don't consider love an emotion. If you go to a 12-step program, they say, hey, you don't have to like everyone here, but you have to love them. Well, if I don't like them, how am I supposed to love them? But you learn it's action. It's in the will. You desire the best for them, even if you don't like them too much, Now, also for a lot of studies, love doesn't have a distinct facial expression. Fear does, and we can identify it. Surprise does. All the others do. But that's because love doesn't appear to be a single emotion, kind of a lone note. Love is usually a mix of feelings. It's a certain tune or melody. And in fact, it's a state of being. Love is a state of being. And it usually encompasses all the basic emotions. So when you love someone, of course you can be joyful and happy. You can also love someone and be sad. Love someone and be angry. Love someone and be surprised or afraid or ashamed. Sometimes all at the same time. I mean, truly, all while still loving them. And we all know that, Probably the biggest thing that I hear is people holding back when their partner upsets them. And it makes sense. They do something that upsets you. You don't want to rock the boat. Maybe you're scared of how strong the relationship is. You don't want to test it. Maybe you think, I don't even deserve to say anything because this person's doing so much for me, and who am I? That's a mistake. That's a mistake because it will get worse. Repression, to repress what's happening, takes a huge physiological toll. Huge. If you care about your health, repressing emotions is one of the worst things you can do. So first of all, it's unhealthy. But actually, scans have shown that suppressing an emotion actually heightens it. It heightens the activity in the amygdala, the fear center in the brain. So if your partner upsets you and you don't say anything, it actually will upset you more by repressing it, because stifling emotion has a rebound effect. There's so many people that become so stressed, women particularly, because they've been culturally indoctrinated not to express their emotions. Smile all the time, don't be unhappy. That women become so stressed and tense from holding back the negative emotional effect that it harms them. They've actually done studies. So they got a bunch of women and they showed them a bunch of grisly photos, some very sad. And they showed it to them and said, try not to reveal your emotion. Try to keep your face still. And when they did that, their emotions were a lot bigger than if they just allowed them to react however they would be, Then they said, after that, so it's exasperated, but then they said, okay, we're going to show you these other photos, same type. Reframe it. Distancing. So how do you do that? See it like a medical examiner, like a scientist. We're going to show you his photos. This time pretend you're a scientist, just in your imagination. Same type of photos. But when they did that, they were able to regulate their emotions more just by reframing it. Reappraisal intervenes as emotion is being generated and then modifies it and shapes it. So oftentimes with a client, They'll be feeling something, and I'll say, okay, let's just pretend you're a scientist, kind of unblend, look at it from an objective perspective, just like you're a scientist. Oh, patient has a heartbeat that's rising. Patient seems to be clenching their hands. Patient seems to be having thoughts that are saying, oh boy, this is going to be a disaster. Patient seems to be having feelings of fear. And just, if you look at it objectively, you practice unblending, you will actually modify the very emotional experience, So this is called reappraisal, by reframing it. And reappraisal is a much more effective strategy. And the reason is because reactive emotion, before you even think about it, boom, there's a reaction. Those flash and they come up fast. And reappraisal intervenes as the emotion's being generated, as it's being generated. It already, because it's going to a framework. They're like, okay, I'm going to go in this conversation. For instance, one person, Dr. John O'Connelly, it's kind of funny. He said, okay, when you're in a fight with someone, whether it's your friend, lover, boss, pretend that you're in enemy territory and you're like a detective and you have to write down and think what the information the enemy is giving you. Who's the enemy? Your partner? No. Your partner's not the enemy. It's these negative emotions. And that's what you're writing down, looking at it. And if you look at like a scientist, like, this negative emotion is getting in the way of our connection. Oh, this emotion is. These thoughts are. And just by kind of framing it in that way, it really and you're pretending it's like a game. That can help you. Suppression, on the other hand, that occurs when the emotion registers in the brain. To suppress something, it already has to be registered. And then you have to work very hard to push that intense emotion down. And when you do that, your heart speeds up more to repress it. Stress chemicals are released. Your system's flooded with stress hormones. So smothering emotions, bad for you. And it's bad for any relationships. The effort is exhausting, And like I said, it distracts you from attending to the emotional cues coming from your partner. So what does that mean? That means you're not going to respond well. You're going to miss the cues and you're going to respond wrongly. Being objective is much better. So the most functional way to regulate difficult emotions is share them. Share them. I mean, really, not blaming, so if someone's a little upset, say, hey, why are you yelling at me? Well, you just accuse them of yelling at you. Instead, you could be like, when I know it's not your intention. Those are the magic words. I know it's not your intention. But when I hear someone raising their voice, that's how I experience it. I actually start to get scared. I start to, my heart starts, racing. And I don't respond very clearly. You share the emotion. That's social intelligence. That's emotional intelligence. If you master that, I don't care how dysfunctional someone is, they just have to do two things. Take responsibility for your reaction. It's not your problem. It's not your intention. This is me. Maybe because childhood. Who knows why? But this is how I react. And two, share it and be honest. And what's very interesting is actually confiding in another person helps you reorganize your thoughts and responses. Simply confiding helps you to get very clear about your priorities. When you confide, your brain is ready to receive new information, to receive feedback, to feel comforted and calm. Because you know what it's like when you need to be heard, and it doesn't matter what the other person's saying. You will not take in any new information until you're heard, until this person hears X, Y, and Z. Now this is complicated because the issue you're having is usually with the very person who's triggering the bad feeling. That's the problem. And fear in love and attachment is pretty interesting. Probably the most proficient researcher on attachment issues is a guy, Mario McCormack. He's a psychologist, fascinating guy. Guy's Jewish. Guy decided to study fear because, about the Holocaust, about what people went through. So he started studying all these things around fear, and attachment. Some interesting things. Anxiously attached people, they fear around not mattering to anyone. If you're anxious, your biggest fear is, I won't matter. I won't matter, Your greatest fear is people leaving you. You don't matter enough to them, and they will leave you. Avoidant people, their biggest fear is on the unknown. The unknown. They have to know everything. Everything has to be black and white, set out. They have to know everything. Particularly avoidant people have the fear of death. If you noticed, you talk to a lot of avoidant people, they're very existentialist. They're very philosophical. They have a lot of fear and dread about death, about what's going to happen. They don't feel secure. So this psychologist, Mario McCormack, he realized, he says this, he goes, after studying fear for all these years, he realized that our bonds with others are not only the most crucial source of vitality. You ever feel dead inside? Well, it might be because you're not very closely attached to anyone. But not only for our vitality, but our strongest defense. Strongest defense. People who aren't strongly attached, they often experience life as terror. They're terrified. Their system's always up and down because they don't have other people to regulate them. Perhaps you've seen couples, and I have, and this person's, and they're both so negative, just complaining, and then they get together, and they quiet down, and everything's okay as long as they're together. But anyway, he says, after studying fear, he realized he wasn't studying fear. He says, suddenly I realized I was studying love. Because fear is all about your attachment, And fear is very noisy when it comes to love of relationships. Why? Well, your relationship is your main source of emotional support, your main source of comfort. And when that seems to be in jeopardy, fear lights up. And I know a lot of people say, boy, I just did X. I just said Y. And he or she really overreacted. I mean, geez, talk about drama. This is how your brain is designed. That's normal. That's normal. When you perceive your relationships in threat, you will feel a lot of fear. That's normal. That's normal. In fact, there's a specific neural pathway in the amygdala that actually switches on automatically. You have no control over this. Switches on automatically when a loved one is suddenly perceived as unavailable. Or when a loved one is temporarily removed from your side, it switches on. Panksepp is the guy, really famous guy, and he coined primal panic for that. It's designed. That's the only reason. That's the only thing that neural pathway does, just to give you panic when your relationships are in danger. He calls that primal panic, and we all kind of know that. Maybe you hear a guy says, I talk and just, my wife, she just shuts down like she's not listening. And what happens? Well, then I get really dysregulated. I just go into a meltdown. I just go crazy. And then, of course, at that point, your partner says, oh, boy, this is ridiculous. Look at you. You're out of control. You're going crazy. No. That doesn't mean you're going crazy. That means you are a mammal in love. That's what that means. You're a mammal in love. And if you're a mammal in love, you have that pathway. And when you suddenly sense a lack of connection, it will automatically go off. People don't know this. They truly believe when this happens, their partner is just crazy. Your brain takes that as a danger cue. It codes that as a threat to your well-being. They've done studies. When that happens, your muscles tense, stress hormones release, blood rushes, and even your thoughts. People have more thoughts of pain, more thoughts of harm. The impulse to freeze or flee, all that happens. And by the way, the elements of this experience are inescapable. Inescapable. And they unfurl very predictably. Any neuroscientist can predict what's going to happen when you say this to that person physiologically. It's not under your control, you know. Each reaction will inexorably lead to the next, you know. And the more this reaction is laid down in the neural circuitry, you know, it's like a track repeating over and over and over again, the more automatic it comes. So boy, now, I mean, think of, like a war vet who comes down and just hears a firecracker. You know, that's all it takes, a sound, but it's been laid down so imprinted that automatically will happen. So if someone has a lot of, been betrayed a lot in childhood, the parents were never there, or they're very inconsistently, even a small perceived threat, like the person being late a half hour. Whereas someone else, it would take a long time to trigger that reaction. They would just go off. And if you look at people, unhappy couples, they're usually visibly angry. You ever see that? They're kind of like simmering, looking at each other. That's a secondary emotion. Underneath that is fear. It's fear. That's what's happening. And that happens, so oftentimes you'll see this, you know. Someone will say like, oh, you know, yeah, it's our anniversary, we have a date. And the partner's like, oh, I know, but let's move that to next week because my boss needs me that day. And your partner just gets angry. What the? And if you see your partner as getting angry, what do? You get aggressive, or you shut down, or you get defensive. Slow down. I'm always telling clients, slow down. And you realize your partner, underneath their anger, is fear. Well, that's rather beautiful. They're afraid of losing you because they love you. And here you are interpreting the anger as an aggression, you know, but underneath that is a fear. Well, I can tell you, if you can recognize that as a fear, your reaction will be very different if you're emotionally literate. But besides that, I'll often ask a client, what happened? Well, I just exploded. Go back to that time. What are your emotions? Anger, anger, anger. As we go forward and we start practicing more, I'll say, slow down. Now what do you feel? Anger. Okay, what else? Checking in the body. And all of a sudden they'll be like, anxiety, anxiety. But at first, the angry person doesn't even know they feel anxious. They don't even know they feel fear because it happens so quick and they're already in their head. It happens automatically. They just say, I'm furious. Well, guess what? If they knew that they were in fact very afraid, very anxious, they would react very differently to their partner. In that case, they can verbalize it. You get angry, feel it. Right. Listen, we made this date, and when you cancel dates automatically, I get scared. I get this anxious response. Like the relationship's in danger. That's how it feels for me. Oh, you can share it now. That's a lot better than sharing. When you do this, you piss me off. Why are you pissing me off? That doesn't go over well, You need to register this anxiety. And what usually happens, someone is angry. What does the person do? Shuts down. And that makes the person more angry. Because it's like, wow, now they're really pulling away. Now they get even more scared, which means they're more angry. And it's just this loop. And Once this happens a lot, like over years, that is very difficult to change. You can. But that will become your relationship pattern. And that will be locked down in your brain. Anger, indifference, further anger, further indifference. And it will just go like that in a cycle. And I know people in their 70s that were acting like this in their 20s, and they're acting the exact same play over and over for decades, That's called like a relationship script. A lot of people call that. And that's simply a pattern, So the way we regulate and process our emotions becomes our way of habitually signaling and engaging with others. That becomes our way of being, just naturally exploding with anger, shutting down. That becomes your social script, The more narrow that script is, the more limited you will be in interacting with that person. And by the way, a lot of times this social script will even be brought to other relationships, the way you deal with your children, your friends, your boss, because this social script is so embedded in you. The truth is, pain is a huge aspect in love, Most people have a hard time focusing and acknowledging hard emotions, they can, they can express hard emotions, anger. I was angry. Yeah. What about the soft emotion? Hurt. It's a lot harder. It's a lot easier to say I was so angry at her than saying I was so hurt by her. And I have clients saying my dad, my father said this, that, and I was so pissed at them. And I know deep inside, I'm like, come on, brother, let's just put it down. You were hurt by them. You were hurt. You were hurt. That's a different reaction, On the surface, anger. Deeper level, sadness. Sadness, why? You have a sense that you have lost your value. If a person's angry at you or says, hey, yeah, I know we were supposed to hang out Wednesday, but my boss, blah, blah, blah. You think, wow, I guess I lost some value in your eyes, that you just flippantly changed that. And on the deepest level, right, so it's anger, sadness, loss of value, abandonment, fear of rejection and abandonment. That's how it goes. Anger. Beneath that anger, sadness. Beneath the sadness, I've lost my value to this person. Beneath that, fear of abandonment and rejection. Now, of course, adults can't get abandoned. No one who's 50 years old says, my parents just died. I am an orphan. You're not, Children can get abandoned, They can get abandoned and crows will come and take them off. So adults can't, but it feels that way. One of the best things is using different words to describe things. In other words, when you say, I need you to do X, well, when the unconscious hears need, it hears necessary for survival, like oxygen. I need this. Say it this way, I really want you to do X. Doesn't that feel less stressful? I really want. So oftentimes people are very combative. They use these really big words. She was acting psychotic. Oh, you mean she was very anxious and yelling? Or she was acting very upset? Psychotic. Oof, that sounds really terrible. I thought he was going to kill me. And sometimes that's true, And sometimes, though, that's really, the language you use is actually making you more upset, So if the husband says, I got to change the day, and instead she gets angry and then she notices underneath this fear, she can change the script. Why? When she says, boy, the fact that you just changed that really hurts me, that prompts what emotion? Tenderness. Tenderness in him. Not only does it produce a tender reaction, but it reassures him that he's really valued. I value your opinion. I value our relationship. And it really hurts me. And of course, think about that. Man, woman, whatever. Your partner says, that really hurt me. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. You feel tenderness. Oh, I'm so sorry, Isn't that a lot different than anger, And that, by the way, there's a parallel between emotional pain, like rejection, and physical pain. Believe it or not, when they scan people's brains, heartbreak will scan and show up similar in many ways to as like burning your entire arm. It'll light up a lot of the same pain pathways. I believe heartbreak is one of the worst pains in the world. And believe me, I know some tough guys that have been in prison, guys that went to military, guys that were wounded, and they will tell me the worst pain they ever felt was that heartbreak. So it's serious. So when people are very upset and excited in relationships, yeah. That's why we used to have these huge, ridiculous, well, not ridiculous, but huge rituals to make sure heartbreak would never happen, marriage and the community and support and all this stuff, That way you knew the person wasn't going to leave you. You got a commitment, And, just the way people talk, you act like I stabbed you. Just because I got a little critical, don't you think you're being a little melodramatic here? This is true, there's a literal neural overlap in the way you process experience of relational pain and physical pain. You experience emotional and physical pain, if it's relational, in a completely parallel way. And that's because, this need for extended maternal care, feeling like you're isolated is a clear signal of danger. It registers as a physical threat to survival. And there's a fairly good book called Sometimes It's Not Depression. And a lot of depression, not all, a lot of depression is, of course, perhaps biochemical, but a lot of it is just a consequence of not being connected. People don't understand how difficult it is to survive with no friends, no partner. You need a couple things for external security: friends, a partner, purpose, a job, place in society, perhaps some kind of spirituality or a transcendent framework, a hobby, something you can see yourself getting good at. Maybe a sense of privacy too, And if you have 4 of those, your body will be very secure. But the truth is, we grew up for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, where if you were isolated, you were dead. You were dead. And if you were being pushed out of your little tribe and people didn't like you, you're getting closer and closer to that border, like, oh boy, you are in danger. You better make some friends fast because you will not survive on your own. You need to stay in a community. And there are so many people out there and they feel awful and they say, why? I have a job and it's pretty good. It's okay. I'm not in any danger. I'm not in any pain. I don't have any big mental illness, and yet I feel terrible, terrible. Why is that? Well, that's because your body's designed to signal you that something is very, very wrong in your life if you don't have strong attachments. And that will go on constantly. It'll go on so long, you might not even notice it. I had a friend who lived this way for years. One day, a woman came into where he worked and just gave him a hug. And he was like, oh, I felt human again. I didn't even notice how dead I was. That's a sad story. People are touch-starved. But that's why it's important to build. And I wish people would teach, like, people in their 20s, like, how should you live your life? However, but one thing I would suggest is instead of moving around a lot or traveling forever, make sure you get into a community. If you don't have one, build one. Make a lot of good friends and try to stay close to there. have some roots in a place. Today it's very difficult. And there are tons of studies. For instance, the MIT guy, big in the news right now, here in America, this famous MIT neurosurgeon quit his job, and he's living in the mountains, like in Colorado or Montana or something, with his dog. But people didn't read why he did that. I did. And it turns out he's a neurosurgeon, and he said something like, well, 90% of people, before they get brain surgery, they try other things. And if you have a family and social support, 90% of people get better before they need brain surgery. And then the people that do make it to me, 90% of them, if they don't have a family, aren't married, and don't have strong support, will not get better. So why am I doing brain surgery costing hundreds of thousands of dollars when only a small percentage of my patients will make it? Only the ones that are married. I mean, that's frightening. But if you look at the numbers, it truly is. You will have a tough time in life if you're all alone. Anyway, this is part 3, and I'll continue in this series. Thank you for listening.